Welcome to the Hypnotic Healers Podcast, your home for insights and insider knowledge about hypnotic change work. With your hosts, control practitioners and hypnotists, Nicole Mazzucato and Anthony Gitch.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hypnotic Healers. I'm Nicole Mazzucato, and as always, I'm here with my friend and co-host Anthony Gitch, all the way over there. Our usual disclaimer before we get started: neither Anthony nor I nor our guest today are licensed medical professional psychologists or psychiatrists, so do not make any changes or alterations to any medications or treatments you're on based on the conversation you hear here today. Take what you like, leave the rest, and while you're leaving stuff, leave us a like, a love, a heart, a thumbs up, send us a nice message, get in touch, say hey, and that's it from me. Hello.
So yes, Nicole, it is always good to see you as usual. And today we are joined with someone actually who is close to Nicole. I know her as well. This is Nicole's mother. We have Ronit Broder with us. And it's the reason we're calling her Ronnie is because I always butcher her first name. And so we'll just leave it at that. You know, I'll admit when I can't, my shortcomings are just right there out there for the world to see. And thank goodness that's the only one there is. Anyway, Nicole's mom is here. She is a licensed acupuncturist. She's a control practitioner. She specializes in women's health, fertility, birth trauma recovery, all sorts of amazing stuff. And everybody, Ronnie.
Hi.
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 That's okay, Anthony. My friends call me Ronnie.
Well, thank you.
That's because none of them can pronounce her name properly either.
Well, you can thank your mom and dad for that one.
Yeah, I've lived with that all my life.
I bet. That is a hard, and I don't know why it's anyway, moving on. So we met after Nicole and I had been hanging out for a while. I was working with Tim, training other practitioners with him as I was being mentored and trained how to become a control practitioner trainer. And that's how I met you originally.
That's right. Yeah.
I was one of the folks in your class. And so welcome to the show. That's been about almost 2 years now, I think. At least a year and a half at least. And you've done a lot of great things since then. You've been around doing lots of acupuncture, growing your businesses. Tell us a little bit about what's going on, how you're applying this stuff to even the birth trauma.
Good question. So, yes, I started my journey, changed careers quite late in life and retrained as Chinese medicine acupuncturist, and then that led me to lots of different modalities, always learning new things, studying with lots of amazing masters in Japanese and Chinese medicine, and then eventually I felt something was missing. In the sense of, the consultations with my patients, we do a lot of talking because people go through such a difficult time with gynecological issues, getting pregnant, fertility, miscarriages, unable to get pregnant, and, birth trauma as well, which is quite a big subject for me. And I really felt that there was something missing so that I could help them to deal with their mental, emotional problems. So then I started looking into working and adding other tools, which I use tapping, which is also based from Chinese medicine.
EFT.
So EFT and TFT.
Tapping, yeah.
That's right, yes. And then eventually I got to hypnotherapy, which is amazing. And now I find it incredibly useful to work with patients with all kinds of difficulties, really. Stress management, anxiety, insomnia, period problems, hot flushes, you name it.
There's a lot of,
and
you said something and that all of a sudden dawned on me that maybe I don't even really recognize what birth trauma is. Is birth trauma from the perspective of the woman giving birth, or birth trauma from this perspective of the newborn, like later on kind of birth trauma sort of stuff that they regress towards and that sort of thing? Explain that a little bit. I explain that to
Interestingly, you're actually missing a perspective as well, which I'm sure Mum will go into detail about now.
So the first thing that I have to say is what is trauma? And trauma is relative to your own perspective.
Sure.
Really. So one person's trauma is maybe not somebody else's trauma. So really, even entering into the fertility world, it can be quite traumatic for people, because they have to go through various tests, medication, injections.
For people who are experiencing infertility.
Yeah.
Okay.
And people who go through natural birth, actually, they could have a very smooth and happy pregnancy, and prepare for labor, doing all sorts of classes, hypnobirthing, etc. And then something happens, and they have to have an emergency C-section, or they lose a lot of blood, or something traumatic happens, or the cord gets wrapped around the baby's neck, or and there's some beautiful birth experiences. So let's put that first. But there are some horrors,
just like heaven coming upon earth.
Not everybody is a sort of earth mother. Let's put it that way. So, and everyone reacts differently to what is painful or what is traumatic for them. So the trauma is very much a subjective thing. Okay. So somebody who could go through, a normal pregnancy and have a difficult labor, can find that traumatic. But in comparison to somebody who has, let's say, an emergency surgery, life-saving operation, lot of blood, or the baby being whipped away and, going into an incubator, or life-saving conditions, or, sort of premature labor. There's all kinds of complications that can occur with pregnancy and labor. And, also post labor.
So anything that has to be considered, that's a big scope of practice. That's a huge scope of practice. Yeah, because I was thinking, okay, from the perspective of the mother or of the baby, right?
Well, actually, there's also something else missing. There's the perspective of the father
or the partner.
The partner.
Right. Well, yeah.
Right.
I bet
so whoever is happening to be in that room, is it can be quite shocking for the partner to see their partner in distress, or going through a life-saving operation, or seeing a lot of blood, or seeing their baby born within all kinds of difficulties. And it's actually something that I'm quite passionate about, because men don't talk, and they don't talk about it, and they hold that trauma for quite a long time. In fact, some people just never forget about it, even though the women tend to talk to their friends, or they can go and have counseling, or go to all kinds of different modalities to get help. The men, it's not offered to the men. And I've seen that time and time and time again. And in fact, I can just mention a case that I had some years ago, where a couple came to me for secondary infertility. And I usually have them in together so we can have a chat and talked things through. And then I asked the wife to actually leave the room while I had a chat with the husband. And it turned out that, she had such a traumatic birth the first time that he was terrified about her going through another birth. And that was part of the unspoken problem.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they weren't getting pregnant, there was actually nothing wrong, but mentally he was just not there and unable to go through a subsequent birth like that. I mean, there's no way that any two births would be the same, or that something traumatic would happen a second time or a third time.
Right. Well, there's no way to prove any of that. Yeah.
There's no proof, and there's no way that the chances are ridiculously high. But mentally, it's very scarring for the person that is watching and in the room and seeing that happening. So, yes, so I urge men to actually come forward and speak about it and get some help, because they're the ones that actually don't talk about it, don't talk to their friends about it, don't go to counsellors or manage their trauma at all.
Well, and it's interesting that you kind of that's mentioned that they don't talk about it. I was really, so I've got a brother who's just a year and a half younger than I am, and I am oftentimes and a few times fairly shocked at the things that these straight men actually talk to each other about, that I would never have thought that they sometimes talk about, right? Particularly with at least the people that he, associates with and that sort of thing on their hunting trips and those sort of things. It's like, wow, you guys talked about what? So I'm hoping that in that regard, that just like the younger generations are moving more towards being more vulnerable, more open to these things, that hopefully men now are starting to become more comfortable with each other. I think that that's starting to happen more, where they're trusting more with each other and talking about things like that.
Yes.
Maybe it's not as outspoken, but I think it does happen more internally than it used to before my generation and younger. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
I think there's also an element here of kind of this, the birth trauma and the partner being present and not talking about it. Oftentimes, when it's the person who's giving birth, the woman who's been through the near death or lost a lot of blood or had her own traumatic experience, the person that's kind of been on the sidelines watching, that hasn't actually been in that position, kind of puts their self to the back. It's like, well, it hasn't happened to me, so I just need to forget what my experience was and just focus on helping that person overcome their experience. So let me just shut down my experience and focus more on that person, because we need to get that person better.
I need to be able to better support that person.
Yes,
and in order to
exactly.
do that, I have to hide everything I'm experiencing, because they can't see my vulnerability, because I have to be their strength. Yeah,
exactly. And they've been through something much bigger and much worse. So what I've been through is not important in comparison.
Right.
There's also, it's a very good point. There's also the problem that, they feel so helpless, and that's the point. The point is they're standing in this room and the emergency, is being sort of taken care of by, floods of doctors and nurses all over the room, machines going off left, right, and center, and being pushed to the side of the room, where you feel utterly helpless.
Yeah.
And even when you're trying to support your partner, and that partner is really suffering with depression or continual crying or, just pain or whatever, you just feel, what can I do? And there's nothing that you can do that's going to make it better. And so you have to hide your feelings to a point. I mean, you don't, a man doesn't, or a woman doesn't, but there's an element of, yes, I have to be strong for that partner because she's the one that's gone through it.
Well, sometimes you have to be able to maintain. I know that there have been certain times in my life where I felt like I need to be able to maintain this because I do know they need me in that fashion right now. Right. And so there are times when I think that it's kind of necessary to play that role. But I think that in a healthy relationship and in a healthy way to do that, there's the back end of that where then you express the fact that this is what my experience was as well.
But this is part of the problem in relationship communication, right? If one person, so let's take this what we're talking about, this situation. So birth trauma, like we said before, the man or the partner will put themselves on the backseat to take care of that other person. But then that creates such a distance between the couple that it then becomes this subject that is so difficult to broach, which puts more and more distance between the couple until, I would imagine a lot of people end up eventually separating or divorcing because there's just this huge void between them that they've never been able to speak about or broach this subject because it just feels too big. I've actually worked with somebody before whose marriage was very much on the brink of extinction. I don't know if extinction is the right word, because of this void that came from postpartum depression. And it was like, it just became a bigger and bigger void.
Did you hear what I said, though? I said, I think it's okay to take that position as long as there is a way for you to express what it was that was happening for you on the other end of that. Right?
Yeah, sure. Because otherwise, otherwise, but a lot of people don't have the capacity to do that. It just feels like the void has become so big that it's like, how do we even begin a conversation about something that maybe happened 10 years ago?
Well, but that's what I mean. See, there has to be 10 years is too late. Right.
Yeah, of course.
I'm talking like, okay, we've had this experience and this is what I'm talking days, right? I'm not talking months later, we have this conversation about what I experienced. I'm saying that we need to be able to, in that moment, be strong, but hey, I've also got my vulnerabilities, yada, yada, yada. I think that that's what I'm suggesting.
But this is a process physically, mentally, emotionally that can last for months or a miscarriage, a stillbirth, something like that. That's not, but that doesn't. Yeah.
Okay.
So again, with stillbirths, by example, I knew a couple who had a stillbirth and at the time, the man really felt, I think, isolated because everyone gravitates towards the woman, which is normal for support, trying to support them as much as possible. And again, the man feels useless and helpless in that state. And there are many cases that they just never reconnect. They can't reconnect. They just cannot fill that void. What I'm saying is that it's out there and it's a very, very big problem. And it's a problem that needs, addressing. It's a problem that needs to be brought out into the open. And I really encourage men to talk to other people, other friends, and get help because per se, any kind of what I call birth trauma, and I'd say it's subjective because it really is something that is buried and it's not forgotten. And I had a patient who was well into her 80s. And after a long discussion, we came across a topic that she brought up to say that I never got over a miscarriage I had in my 20s. And she was 87. I mean, do you need to go through a lifetime still grieving over a miscarriage that you were never allowed to talk about? In many women's lives, and it's probably a little bit different today, but through the generations, they weren't allowed to even discuss it. They weren't even allowed to acknowledge it. They weren't even allowed to grieve, and some doctors, don't worry, you'll just go out there and try again. You'll get pregnant again. You'll have a baby. Just forget about it. Well, you can't forget about it. Many women can't ever forget about it. And it's with them for life. It's an experience that they will never forget for life. So why are we making women forget about it or push it to the very back of their minds when it's always there?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I say I don't know because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, I don't know. So I've worked with a couple women late in their 70s who, a different thing, they didn't miscarry, but their children were taken from them because they were Catholic and pregnant at early ages, that sort of thing. That used to happen quite a bit. Babies taken here, sent to Ireland, that sort of thing. And they still carry that with them. It's a different sort of a trauma.
It is. It's a massive trauma as well.
I think in this context, that women are very supportive of other women that have had miscarriages or traumatic birth, especially more and more so today, very much so when I know from my own friends, as soon as they've been pregnant, their nurses have put them in touch with other women that are pregnant. And, it's the actual nurses that start to create these groups of, oh, you're pregnant with twins, you're pregnant with triplets, you've had
right.
So there's a lot more.
Since social media, really, you've got, you can tap into Facebook groups or various other groups for support.
And I know that there is a shit ton of support out there for men. I know there is, at least in this country, there is.
I don't know if it's in particular to any kind of birth trauma or even, a partner having a miscarriage or a stillbirth. So, I don't know what it's like in the States. I know there's a lot missing in the UK.
There's a lot missing for care in general like this everywhere. It doesn't matter how evolved society is. I think that, and I think that it's interesting because like you were saying, it is kind of, we have been, I think as a society taught almost from an early age. I remember always hearing that women never mentioned that they were pregnant or told anybody that they were pregnant until like the end of the first trimester. Right. Or something like that, however far it is. And then it's actually what they would consider a viable pregnancy.
Yes.
But up until then, and so I think that whole thing of it's okay, just try again has been so enforced and pushed upon society as that's kind of the norm and that's just the way it goes sort of thing that it's interesting. I had never considered it the way that that's
Western medicine.
They just kind of poo-poo that aside.
Just get up and get on with it and try again.
It's that's Western medicine ideology. The problem is that women are going way past their peak fertility before they even start considering pregnancy. So now women are not even thinking about it until their late or mid to late 30s, which is already late. So the older you are, the more chances there are that your egg qualities are going to be lower. That the chances of miscarriages are going to be greater. But, that can happen at any age. So it can happen at 18 or it can happen at 21 or, at any age. But the older you are, the more at risk you are for various things to go wrong. Having said all that, the male fertility rates are going down, and that's become a huge problem. That's become a huge problem. It's becoming a very big problem. And it's strangely enough, it's always down to the woman to go ahead and do the investigations first, and the men don't consider having their sperm checked initially. And that's probably because of, the lack of movement, cell phones and laptops and, that kind of stuff that's impacting on the sperm.
We live an incredibly high stress lifestyle. People working more than ever, moving less than ever, surrounded by all sorts of kind of radio waves and whatever waves, and I don't know what kind of waves that are running through us. Eating the lowest quality food ever.
That's right.
There's our lifestyle in general has a huge impact.
Yeah. And there's alcohol, there's drugs, there's smoking, there's all kinds, and it's actually normally quite easy to fix. With the men's cycle, it's with diet, exercise, and a better sort of lifestyle, you can actually help a healthy sperm. So, and likewise with the women's cycle too. The problem is that women are so busy with their careers nowadays, which is understandable, until they have this heads up. Oh, I think it's time to get pregnant, and everyone thinks it's easy, and it isn't. It really isn't. It might have been easy, and some people are very lucky because they get pregnant very easily, but others really struggle. And, what I say to my patients is, it's like going in for a marathon. You don't put your trainers on and go out running 28 miles. You don't.
Right.
You need to get your body right and ready. Both partners, not just one. Both partners need to be really focused on a healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle, and getting their body ready to the optimum peak performance so that they can have a healthy pregency.
Yeah. But it's their body and their mind, because there's also this huge... there's this massive narrative around birth, that birth is the most painful and the most, this terribly painful. When you see kind of birth in films and things, and it's just this horrific experience, and so most women.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I saw it on Monty Python, and she's just out in the field and just plop, there it is.
There you go. She just pooped it right out. Yeah. But I mean, most media representations of birth is that it's this really horrific experience, and
it doesn't have to be a horrific.
It doesn't have to be. But
I have never seen any of this media stuff you're talking about. I've just seen women having babies.
Yeah.
It's Rosemary's Baby, maybe.
But you're right, because you do need to prepare for it mentally. I mean, it's amazing how sort of we have this illusion of what getting pregnant easily, having a healthy pregnancy, popping out a baby, going through the first 3 years of a child's life, and it's going to be easy peasy. Well, it is for some people, but it's bloody hard work for other people, and it's stressful, and you're not sleeping, you're sleep deprived, and you're nervous, and you might be a new mother and you don't know which end is up. There's so many different things that contribute to having a family.
Here's the flip side of that. Women have been doing it since the dawn
generations.
of time.
Absolutely.
But also, in my experience, not ironically, people from lower income families have a lot more kids and with less problems in general.
Yes.
Why? Because, they get pregnant younger in general because they don't have access necessarily to birth control and things like that. So they're getting pregnant younger. They are not as career kind of driven, let's say. So they are more engaged in sexual activities and having more babies more easily. I mean, I know a lot of lower income families where they have of 3 children upwards, 5 children, and they can barely afford to put food on the table. And you think, oh my God, how do you keep pumping children out? But it's a completely different mentality. And there isn't that mentality that it's difficult to get pregnant. Oh. There is just a mentality of you have sex, you get pregnant, you have a baby, and you just carry on like that.
Well, a huge percentage of the world's population reproduce like rabbits and have healthy pregnancies and cope with crying babies. But we've become so soft in this modern world, and people have babies for lots of different reasons. People have babies because they want one, but they don't necessarily want to be with one.
See, and that, to me, that's irresponsibility. Yeah. That's just irresponsible. That's irresponsible. That's like backyard breeding of a dog. I just want to see, I want my children to know what it's like for a dog to have puppies. So I bred.
It's a little
and
bit
now
what
I've got
we
15
talked about
puppies that we're going to have to put down at the pound because no one wanted them.
But it's a little bit like what we talked about in a previous episode in the pandemic, in the lockdown, when parents were like, fuck, I've suddenly got to be with my kids 24 hours a day. What am I going to do?
Right. It's like, ha, 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 ha. Look, the little bastards you're raising.
So this very nicely brings us back to one of your questions initially, which was, is birth trauma related to the baby's trauma of being born? And I think that can also have an impact. Quite seriously, that can also have an impact. And being born, we don't remember being born. Let's put it that way. Nobody remembers being born.
Consciously
remembers being born. Okay. But again, what I'd like to talk about is what I call mother-child bonding. Which is another big topic because, if it is a particularly traumatic or difficult birth, or even if the baby's taken away from the mother for, incubators or whatever reason, life support, etc., there is an element of, obviously, separation. Okay. And sometimes it's as the child grows up, you see that there's a lost connection. And the repair of actually going back, this is where, the hypnosis is really useful, is going back to repair that bonding. Of a baby's experience and the separation and the mother going through that trauma is really useful and it works on all different levels. It works on the spiritual level, I think. It works on all kinds of different levels, emotional, also releasing the trauma, and some amazing things can happen there by reconnecting the mother-child, just just by actually healing that wound.
Right on. Right on.
There's also something that you mentioned. So there's hypnobirthing is obviously another topic that we actually haven't talked about on this podcast, and we will talk about it in another episode. But you also mentioned helping women with period pains, which is something we definitely haven't touched on this podcast. And talk a little bit about how you've used hypnosis. I know you combine hypnosis with acupuncture, but talk a bit about how you've used hypnosis to help women with period pains, because I think there's a lot of people out there that wouldn't make a mind connection with menstrual cramps.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't when I was growing up.
Yes.
You didn't associate your menstrual cramps with pain?
No, I didn't associate menstrual cramps having anything like being within my control. Within my control.
Oh, okay.
Right, subconsciously,
it's feeling the discomfort behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha,
I mean,
gotcha.
to the point that I used to pass out and vomit, and
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I've got friends who have had bad things like that in my lifetime. Yeah.
Again, I think we'd need to have a separate conversation on just periods, because that's another one of my really favorite topics.
Not for this podcast. We're over
I can see you flushing already.
This is the last time this year, gentlemen, we'll be having a discussion about women's issues.
Welcome to season 3. Gender issues.
So yeah, it's I mean, coming from Chinese medicine background, let's put it this way, and also having seen my mum suffer with period pains throughout her life, me suffering with period pains throughout my life, and my daughter's inheriting that,
the curse of the woman. That's what one of my neighbor ladies said one time.
Yeah, and let me explain to you that,
I have been woman-splained periods since I was a kid. Men have been woman-splained menstrual cramps our whole lives. We are forced to watch commercials about it. We are forced to experience it on a regular basis.
Oh, diddums. Really, really. And that's why men don't have children. Because they couldn't cut it.
That's
yeah. So so the whole thing about pain and periods is again having a little knock on Western medicine. It's just normal. Get on with it. Go away. Take a painkiller. Take another painkiller. Take something else.
The neighbor lady used to crawl underneath the bed with her Bible. She did. We found her underneath her bed one time with the Bible, praising and cursing and this and that. And she's like, this. And we were like, okay, that's not really the way that my mom and sister handle that, but okay.
Yeah. And in those days, it used to be known as the curse. And why, why would it call it a curse when it's actually a blessing?
My friend Kim just calls it Aunt Flo. Aunt Flo's coming to visit. You can't go do that today.
Does she bring the chocolates?
Yeah, I've got prior arrangements.
She's like, if you're coming over tonight, Aunt Flo's here, so bring something particular. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Bring the ice cream. Anyway, so coming from the Chinese medicine perspective, there's no reason why a woman should actually go through pain and a difficult cycle. Really, menstruation.
Well, I mean, there are physical or medical reasons.
There are.
And what's that? Andriomotesis or not andriomotesis? What is the term?
Can we let
for
him
it?
Struggle?
Endometriosis. What is it?
Endometriosis.
There we go.
Well
yes,
done,
that's where the it grows on the outside of the uterine tube and it creates all sorts of pain during periods and that kind of stuff.
Adhesions and fusions. Look,
Now,
there
how
are
do you
lots
think
of
I
reasons.
know this? Do you want to know how come I know so much about women's reproductive health?
Because you're a woman's best friend.
No, because I watch soap operas.
Oh my God, you're so sad. You are so sad.
And because I've got a shitload of female friends, and they've all got Aunt Flo's. So,
so yes, there are medical reasons why a woman would go through trials and tribulations with her menstrual cycle, but on average, a woman doesn't need to suffer. She doesn't need to have pain. It should be, you should know that it's coming because there might be a little bit of cramping or something, but, manageable, absolutely. There shouldn't be any headaches. There certainly shouldn't be any vomiting or anything like that. It's a normal part of life.
Mm-hmm.
And get help. For God's sake, don't suffer because you don't need to. You really don't need to.
That seems like that would be kind of knowledge that was handed down, kind of that tribal knowledge that, hey,
but it's
you don't
not,
need
though,
to
isn't
be in
it?
pain like this.
No, but it's
right?
not.
Obviously,
though,
it's not.
No,
right.
No, because those women that do suffer, like Mum's just said, it's take a painkiller and get on with it, or but it's only now. So a couple of months ago, I read that in Spain they've now brought in a law that companies have to allow female employees that they have to allow them grace if they suffer with periods, because it's never been a thing that's been recognized before. It's never been a thing. It's like, it's never been given space, and it can be really, really hard going for some people. I mean, in my case, it's not the case anymore because I don't know how, maybe some, mental, physically, whatever it is, things have changed for me. But it used to be that 2 or 3 days of the month, I couldn't function mentally, physically, nothing. I just couldn't function. And that's really hard going when society doesn't actually recognize that that's a thing. It's like, well, just take a pill, get up and get on with it.
And I guess I've had enough female friends, and it's such a totally different experience as a gay male, that all of my female friends have always taken care of themselves. But you're right, they have always received from employers that we've worked with, other friends, fathers, husbands, boyfriends, here's a pill, let's just get going.
Yeah.
They want that time to take for themselves, but they're oftentimes not granted it. So you're right. That is a very common, because society does just kind of look at it like, get up. This is just the way that it is. Let's go. And
when you think about it, in tribal times, or even in tribes today, the women are kind of set aside for that period of time. They're kind of sent off to,
nurture
to whether it's, whether it's taken in that sense to nurture themselves, to nurture each other, to have space away from, the rest of the community, to do what they need to do, whether that's to completely disconnect, to just do their own thing. There's certain religions where women have rituals around the time of menstruation, where there is a sense of separation and sacredness. Is that the right word? Sacredness around it, and where the woman is given that space and time to separate herself. But in today's society, again, it comes back to, we're living in this really fast-paced world where it's go, 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 go all the time. So it's get up, take a pill, and get on with it, and carry on doing everything that you do on a normal day, not taking into account that there is a female monthly cycle. There are peaks and troughs in that cycle where we are high energy and ready to go and will, bulldoze over anyone and everything, and low energy where it's like, piss off and leave me alone because I can't even lift up a fingernail right now.
Yeah. And going back to hypnotherapy, it's a really useful tool. So,
I think that it's an interesting subject for sure, and there's a lot of viewpoints. around a lot of aspects of it. I know for a fact with the discussions I've held with either gay men, a lot of gay men that I know, when we've had discussions about things like this, it's a very different discussion that would certainly happen between straight men.
Yeah. But you know, the thing is that you know, it's back to the old saying, I can't feel your pain. And men are lucky, you know, they sail through life with their own issues. And, you know, and I absolutely believe
penis gives and know right just to have everything handed out.
No. What I'm saying is that you know, physically, obviously, you go through changes and hormones, etc. But you know, you don't go through what women go through with, you know, their gynecological issues with menstruation every month, or, you know, housing a baby, having a baby, you know, a baby attached to your breast for however long.
Basically, it's not a monthly kicking the balls. That waits until, you know, it just waits until you get.
And
there's parts of this discussion that I'm not going to get involved in because as a man, there's some of this discussion that I don't agree with. That I absolutely would go.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, but there is a lot of research.
I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to suggest that men go through a hormonal change and then they never go through another one.
No,
right?
They
men
do.
have
they
regular monthly issues. I know men that go through and they have ups and downs through their month because of the way that they're feeling. And none of that is ever addressed in the medical profession. Never heard it touched on. Never heard it touched on in commercials. Yet there's tons of support out there for women for everything, from their fucking armpit sweat to everything else. And yet there is 0 to 1% support for men who are going through any of this shit.
Right.
Because
you're quite right, because that's
pointed
what I was
out
going
as the
to
ones
say.
who rule everything. That we are left in the dirt when it comes to these sorts of issues.
Right.
And so it's frustrating sometimes as somebody who walks both worlds, so to speak, right? I understand both sides, but sometimes as a man, I feel like we as a whole are not given any space to the fact that we understand things, that we go through our own things that we're never, ever given an opportunity to shine a light on. Right. And so I think that sometimes women are hard on men. I think that women are really hard on men sometimes, and they don't take into account that we are taught that we are not allowed to discuss some of this stuff, because if we express ourselves, now we're women haters, and now we're this, and we don't understand. But it's like, okay, so don't say anything at all, because if you do, you're automatically the bad guy. Right. And so sometimes it's hard for, I think, some men out there.
Anthony, I truly believe that, you know, one of the great things about podcasts is that hopefully there's an audience out there listening. And fingers crossed.
Let's hope. You're 3, we're hoping.
And you know, and discussions are beginning to happen. And people are communicating and understanding more. And I quite agree with you. And that's what I was trying to say, was that there is absolute hard evidence that men go through menopause too. And there's a lot of help out there for men. Not enough, I grant you.
And not as much as there is for women.
And there's not enough, as Nicole says, as there are for women. But it's definitely recognized, and men do go through hormonal changes throughout their life. So, yeah, absolutely. They should be recognized, and it should be talked about, and it should be addressed and supported.
Right there is what it needs to be talked about. No, people are afraid to have conversations like you and I are having. and like we have, because it's what they feel like, I think sometimes, is that if they express themselves, if they get excited, if they get passionate, that all of a sudden it shuts things down. Right. And then communication isn't necessarily heard. But I think that if people were to have more conversations like this, it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Right. But, then again, I know both of you, and I feel comfortable expressing myself to both of you without feeling as if, because you also know that you can slap me around a bit if you need to. And Nicole knows that oftentimes when that happens, it shakes something loose with me. And I'm always open to recognizing where I need to change my views and possibly open up and let a little light in. Right. It's one of the things that I love about this podcast and having Nicole on it and some of the guests we've had is because it's changed perspectives I've had. And I think that it's important that we all are able to do that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's about, understanding our bodies, whether we're male or female. And actually education, because there's a really severe lack of education. I find it astounding when I have couples coming to me to start their fertility journey. And I have to literally go through ABC. I start right from the beginning. Absolutely right from the beginning, because I don't know, there's a huge amount that is missing in the knowledge of our own bodies. People know how to have sex. Okay, from however they learned it, but they know nothing about how their body works. Nothing.
And most people nowadays, they learn so much about what they think sex is based upon what they see in pornography on the internet, because there's so much exposure to that at such young ages that I think that that adds to the disconnect. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting the way we'll see how that kind of is able to clean up if things start changing. But I think that has a part to do with it, because if you're not relating your body, if you are disengaged so much by the pornography that you're seeing, that you're not relating the person that you're engaged with as a real person, as that person you love, rather than just an object, right? I think that when you start to do that, think about how that disconnects you from the rest of everything that's going on in your body.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the mind-body connection, isn't it? With like everything else, it's the mind-body connection. It's listening to your body. It's what it's telling you. Understanding how it works, and actually knowing to get help if you need it. And again, we're going full circle, but I'm here, I suppose, promoting hypnotherapy, but it really does help. Even teaching people how to do self-hypnosis will help them calm down and help them understand a different perspective and handle different situations that they go through. And it's not necessarily to do with, the reproductive system, but everything that comes to them in life. It's a journey. Life isn't smooth, and it has all kinds of bumps along the way. So use this tool. It's amazing.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up. I have enjoyed our conversation. And thank you, because there are some of those aspects that I had never really even been made aware of. And so, good for you for bringing the hypnosis and everything into that world, because I think it's going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me on. And it was a pleasure talking to you, as always.
Well, I don't know if it was a pleasure talking to me, but you certainly...
So if you're interested in getting in touch with Roneet, you can find her at naturalthinking.co.uk, and we'll also put her contact details in the show notes. Highly recommend her, obviously.
I would hope so.
Yeah, as you can tell, she's a true expert in her field, has not stopped studying for the past nearly 20 years, and continues to strengthen her skills and her knowledge, and is a great practitioner. And as you may have noticed, refers to her clients as patients, and is able to, because she's a licensed acupuncturist and uses
correct.
hypnosis and hypnotherapy as complementary tools to her main practice as an acupuncturist.
Yep.
Cool. That's it from us today. We'll be back
Nicole.
in another week. So thanks for listening, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you again, Ronit.
Thanks for listening to the Hypnotic Healers podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review and follow us on Facebook. You can also join our mailing list at hypnotichealers.com.